back in those days, in 1989, when we were joined the exchange rate mechanism and interest rates had gone to the stratosphere. At that point in time, I realised that within these instructions, it started paying interest on cheques that hadn't cleared. And so I sat there and thought to myself, right, okay, so in that case then, if I have two bank accounts and I write a cheque from this bank account to that bank account, in theory, I should be able to get interest on money I haven't got. So I did this. So you walk down to the bank and you pay the cheques into and then your balance goes up on both sides. 1,500 quid, I think it was at the time. And then after 3 days, it goes back down again. So I discovered accidentally that banks create money and you can create it out of nothing.
This is the MMT Podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Hi, I'm Christian Riley and welcome to the Modern Monetary Theory Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at MMT Podcast and you can support the show by going to patreon.com/MMT Podcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. A big thank you to all our supporters so far. At the beginning there, you heard finance and information systems expert Neil Wilson. And in a moment, we've got a dynamite conversation between him and MMT scholar Phil Armstrong at an event which took place on the 15th of November 2020. In the show notes, I've linked to the website of the organisers of the event, the wonderful Gower Initiative for Modern Money Studies, and their website is where you can sign up for email alerts about their upcoming events and support them financially, and it's also where you'll soon be able to see video of this event. If this is your first time hearing about MMT, you might want to listen to our first 3 episodes where me and Patricia lay out the basics in an easy to understand way. But if you want to dive in here, a key insight is that if you live in a monetarily sovereign country like, say, the UK, the US, Japan, Canada, or Australia, your national currency is a public monopoly, and it's issued by your government or its designated agents. As the issuer of currency, your government can never run out of its own money, which means that the policies of austerity that we've all been suffering through for years are based on a myth. And many of us think it would be quite nice to take that myth and fire it into the heart of the sun. But even as you hear these words, your inner fiscal conservative is saying to you, rocket fuel, guidance systems, that sounds expensive. How are you going to pay for that? Which is rich, given that the same inner fiscal conservative has no problem allocating more and more annual spending to your inner military-industrial complex, which is probably down to the large campaign donations he gets from your inner Raytheon lobbyist. What I'm trying to say is we need to get big money out of inner politics because it's antithetical to inner democracy. But more than that, what I'm actually trying to say is that we usually and quite naturally think about money from the perspective of a currency user rather than a currency issuer. We're accustomed to thinking about money as something you've got to get before you can spend, which is true for you and me. But then we make the mistake of thinking our government's in the same position when it couldn't be in a more different position. As currency issuer, your government is in fact in the exact opposite position to you and me. As currency issuer, your government spends new money into existence every time it spends. And when it spends more than it collects over a given period of time, that money that it hasn't collected back yet remains out there in the private sector in the pockets and bank accounts of currency users. That's you and me and everybody else that's not the government. That's our money. And it keeps circulating until it's removed from the system via taxation. The government's deficit is the non-government sector's surplus, by definition. So far from saying deficits don't matter, MMT is saying that deficits do matter, but in a way that perhaps your inner fiscal conservative hasn't considered. The evidence of a government deficit being too small is unemployment, i.e. there's not enough spending power in the economy to give paid work to everybody who wants it. And the evidence of the deficit being too large is inflation. The MMT proposal for an economy that avoids both of these things is to have the currency issuer, the government, guarantee a job at a fixed, socially inclusive wage to anybody that wants one, and to have these jobs created directly in the places where the unemployment occurs, in consultation with local communities. Given that the government deficit is a residual, it's after-the-fact accounting, MMT proponents say that rather than picking an arbitrary deficit number, the government should pick a real-world outcome and let the deficit float around that outcome. Implementing a centrally funded, locally administered job guarantee would inject spending into the economy precisely where it's needed and give us that preferred real-world outcome, which is full employment and price stability. And you can listen to our episode 47 with Professor Pavlina Chernova for more about this policy proposal. In the conversation that follows, you'll hear Phil and Neil talk about Bill Mitchell's blog and about a paper that Phil co-authored with Warren Mosler on the Weimar Republic hyperinflation, both of which I've linked to in the show notes, along with much of Neil's writing and also all of our episodes with Phil, and to where you can get Phil's brand new book, which features interviews with key economic thinkers, including the principal architects of MMT. In other news, for people who can remember what it's like to be in a room with other people who aren't your immediate family and are getting a bit nostalgic for those heady days, our friend and regular guest, Dr. Stephen Hale, is running an in-person seminar on the 9th and 10th of January 2021 at the University of Adelaide called Rethinking Capitalism, Economics as if People and the Environment Matter. And this crazy people mattering more than numbers thing is a concept that Stephen's been successfully introducing to the economics community for a while now, so that's going to be an excellent event. And I've linked to where you can sign up for that in the show notes. And as ever, I've linked to where you can support this podcast financially via patreon.com/MMT podcast. Support starts at $1 a month, which is 76 British pence at the time of recording. And no matter what level of support you give, you get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes, where you can ask me and Patricia MMT questions. A special announcement, our next Q&A episode will be with MMT founder Warren Mosler, and we'll be asking Warren as many of our patrons' questions as we get time for on the 8th of December 2020. The episode that results from that will go out to patrons a few days after that, and then out to the general public on the 23rd of December as our holiday special. Also right now on our Patreon feed, we have early access to an interview with Sam Levy about introducing MMT to people with a more mainstream grasp of economics. Looking at you, inner fiscal conservative. And as ever, thanks for the time you put into learning and spreading the word about MMT. And thanks again to Sarah, Claire and Prue from GIMS for organising this event. We start with opening remarks from Prue. Let's dive in.
For both returners and newcomers, GIMS would like to extend a very warm welcome to this event, wherever you are in the world. Thanks to Claire, our dedicated IT and website manager, we are really getting the hang of this new meeting technology. Nobody has had to fly in or take a train or car from anywhere. It's the new normal, as they say, although we do miss the personal touch. I'm really delighted to present our next in conversation event with our very own UK MMT expert, Neil Wilson, who you will know if you follow us on social media, was recently appointed as an advisory member associate member to GIMS. A very warm welcome to both Neil and Phil. It's a pleasure to have you with us. The world is on fire, both in climate reality and in terms of politics. The recent US election has left the world on tenterhooks, and in the UK, the political scene is equally in disarray. COVID-19 has revealed the cracks in the market-dominated economic ideology, which has influenced public policy for so many decades and left our vital public and social infrastructure in a state of decay. The economic instability that is being caused by the fear of losing one's job or loss of employment already because of COVID-19, combined with the prospect of a very uncertain outlook as a result of the likely long-term economic consequences of the pandemic and the coming disruption of climate change, has left many people feeling hopeless and helpless. Now, whilst one doesn't want to underestimate the challenge before us, as those promoting the economic orthodoxy of previous decades dig their heels in, there is perhaps a small light at the end of the tunnel, even as the fight back against MMT is in full swing. GIMS, along with the MMT podcast and other international movements, are continuing with their efforts to provide an educational platform to challenge the economic orthodoxy that has defined our age. The world has certainly changed irrevocably, but in doing so, it has revealed a broken economic system, which in turn offers an opportunity to rethink how we do things. MMT is the starting block for that change. Understanding monetary reality and how government really spends will enable a discussion about our priorities and how they can be achieved to create a more equitable, fairer, and environmentally sustainable world. There might be setbacks along the way, but that conversation is beginning in earnest. Now, before I hand you over to Phil and Neil, a quick reminder that the GIMS has a website which is full of useful resources which are being updated all the time, and where you can sign up for our newsletter for updates and make donations. We are a voluntary organisation that depends on your contributions to continue our work. Don't forget too, our dedicated colleagues, Christian and Patricia, over at the MMT podcast, do tune in for their informative library of podcasts featuring numerous interviews with MMT economists and other experts. So, without further delay, let's get started. Over to you, Phil and Neil.
Hello, I hope you can hear me out there. Just to say to everyone, good to be back again to be doing another interview with an MMT expert. Now, Neil is a little bit of a rarity in a sense, because if you think about it, when we think about MMT, most of the experts, in inverted commas, they're either in the US, we list them, but you'll know what I'm talking about, or in Australia, and there's a few in the continent. But when we pushed, we think, who are the main players in the UK in MMT? Then the list's quite short. And the one name that comes to mind for me personally, not putting Neil under any pressure then, I can see him smiling. I did mention to Warren once a bit ago about MMT in Britain, and the only name he can come up with was indeed Neil. So he's a rare man, an MMT expert here in the United Kingdom. All right. Now, obviously, he understands MMT in an international perspective, but what's crucial, I think, for today, makes it a bit different, is Neil brings his particular expertise and he can apply that to a British context. So, that's what we're really aiming to do. I won't kind of spoil the surprise of the questions, and I'm aiming to give Neil a platform to entertain you, to shall we say, bring you some special insights from his experience in MMT. So I'm going to ask Neil his first question now, and really as a general intro, just to get him warmed up. Neil, when did you first come across this MMT thing? And when you came across it, what was it about it that made you think, whoa, there's something in this?
Thank you for the introduction, Phil. I'm not quite sure I can follow that.
Oh, you can, my friend, you can.
My God. Talk about bigging somebody up well beyond their belly, Christ. When did I first come across MMT?
Yeah. And why did you like it when you did?
Right, okay. About 1989.
Whoa.
Ooh. Now then, there's a story.
I didn't know it existed then, Neil. This is
that's
really
right.
Interesting.
Nobody did. However, I'm the sort of character who when you apply for bank accounts and everything, and they send you those little leaflets through that come with the bank accounts. Well, I'm the sort of guy that reads them. Very unusual in that sense, reads them, you see. And you read the small print and you read it through at the back. And back in 1989, of course, we had these wonderful things called checks, which are, for younger viewers, it's where, you get a piece of paper and you write an instruction on it to your bank to pay somebody else. And back in those days, in 1989, when we were joined the exchange rate mechanism and interest rates had gone to the stratosphere. At that point in time, I realized that within these instructions, it started paying interest on checks that hadn't cleared. And so I sat there and thought to myself, right, okay, so in that case, then if I have two bank accounts and I write a check from this bank account to that bank account and a check from that bank account to that bank account, bearing in mind I'm a student at the time, then in theory, I should be able to get interest on money I haven't got. So I did this, and my time's cheap when you're a student. So you walk down to the bank and you pay the checks into and then your balance goes up on both sides. 1,500 quid, I think it was at the time. And then after 3 days, it goes back down again. So I discovered accidentally that banks create money, and you can create it out of nothing. So that was the first thing. I've always been interested in finance, and then I obviously moved on into my career and ended up working at what was at the time the Halifax Building Society, as it was changing into a bank. And I remember going down there into there's a data center at Copley in Halifax where they keep the mainframes, or at least they used to keep the mainframes back then. I don't know if they're still there. And I went down into the bunker there where the people who actually maintain the mainframe system that runs the Halifax's banking system and all the branches all the way across the country. And I asked them where they kept the money. And he showed me where they kept the money by opening up the actual computer code that does the work and showing that essentially it's just a straightforward accounting entry. When they do a loan, they mark up on the loan accounts, and that then creates an advance, which they mark up on that side, and then they send it into the clearing system and transfer it. And so I spent a lot of time working at a bank. The job I was doing at the moment got me around all the various different departments, the mortgage department, the insurance department, and of course the treasury department, which is really interesting, which at that time was on the 5th floor of Trinity Road, and they were moving it to Old Broad Street in London because at that time, in the mid-90s, you had to be in London if you wanted to do bank treasury. And that upset a lot of people in Halifax who have been maintaining a building society's treasury department for years, and then they were being shipped off down to London, and quite a lot of them left. But that's when they went into the trading game. Stopped being a building society and started being a trading bank, which of course, as we all know, where that ended up in the mid 2000s when the Halifax went pop. And then obviously from 2010, that's when I actually run into MMT proper. And I was looking around for this because something didn't add up from the financial crisis. It just didn't make any sense. And I'm trained in accountancy and systems work and all that sort of stuff. I like to know how things work, and it just didn't make any sense. And then you go in there, you go onto obviously Bill's blog, which is where I started, and the MMT 101 that he has on there, that's still on there. Got started on that, and obviously I've been sort of commenting ever since, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, well, your comments are very, very very perceptive. I think that's when I first saw you commentating on articles in The Guardian, I think, from an MMT viewpoint. Obviously, a regular contributor on Billy Blog. We've all enjoyed, I guess many of the viewers today will have enjoyed some of your little biting comments.
Juicier comments, yeah. Yeah,
juicier comments, that's a good phrase. And this is an open-ended question, Neil, but obviously, Rishi there, he's got to work on his spreadsheets. Now, we have seen him try to deny he looks at, well, as you know, we'll have to pay for it and all that sort of tripe. Now,
we're definitely going to have to pay for it.
Now, Rishi, let's be generous. Let's say he just sees the money coming in and out, all right? And he's just mixed up what's paying for what. So he thinks the tax is paying for the spending, but really it's the spending enable us to pay taxes. So let's say he's just made a mistake. Like when you look at the sky, you think that the Earth's going around the sun. Now, the thing is, shelving that for a moment, and you can comment on it if you want. What I really want to know is, given Rishi's done what he's done, despite he doesn't really understand the system, has it maybe nudge that door open a bit for the more enlightened of us and saying, like, post-COVID, does it point forward to what we might hope to aspire to if we ever get to a post-COVID world? And you can comment on that if you wish. Where are we going? Has it opened any doors? Don't be too negative. We want people to come back, Neil.
No, we're not commenting on COVID, otherwise that will go down very badly.
Yeah.
I mean, the key point about MMT is that the key thing for me about MMT is that there's an amount of savings there that don't actually relate to real things. And every time you talk to anybody on the economic side of either persuasion, you'll find out that they really, really struggle with that concept that there's a pile of money that isn't actually associated with anything. That's actually what MMT shows is the case. It shows essentially that the monetary circuit, where the money's swirling around like this, has only actually got an inductive link to the actual real economy. It's not a direct link, it's an inductive link. It's like your toothbrush charge. MMT sits there, the charger spins away, it gets warm on its own. It's only when you actually put the toothbrush charger on it that it actually does anything, but it's still going there around. The monetary circuit runs around entirely on its own, and only induces activity within the actual real circuits and actually produces real goods and services. There's always this pile of money that isn't actually being used. And mainstream economics and Marxist economics and all the rest of it really, really struggles with that concept. So you have this strange situation where you have people on the left-hand side of the political divide wanting to go around confiscating these net savings. And then you have people on the right who want to go around masking these savings with debt. And obviously now that's not working. They want to go to taxation via negative interest rates, which is the same thing. But these savings are rainy days funds. They're actually people build these things up. So if you take them away, all they do is just build it straight back up again because they're building it up for insurance purposes. And so we end up with this doom loop where they keep trying to take it away and then people build it up again and it just keeps going backwards and forwards. Yeah. MMT says, just accommodate the savings, stop worrying about them. Just let's move on. So the thing is that, the way the government's been spending over the last 6 or 9 months, it just blows the can't afford it argument completely and totally out of the water. And it's just anybody who goes around talking about that now just have got zero credibility. So for my money, the deficit battle is over. We've won that one. That particular battle we've won. You've got conservatives throwing in the towel. They're sitting there now, and even conservative commentators are sitting there saying, well, we're only borrowing from ourselves, so it doesn't really matter. Things along those sort of lines. It's it's completely over as far as I'm concerned. The deficit battle, we've won that one. So it's just a mopping up operation now, really, for people who just haven't got the message yet.
Yeah.
But yet, still we're getting people trying to do that. I mean, this week, what do we have? Resolution Foundation saying, we need to put up a load of taxes to fix government finances. It's just idiotic. And then on the other side, today I've got to read Daniel Hannan, who was sitting there saying, well, we need to cut government spending to fix government finances. And it's just like, no, you don't. You're both idiots. Stop it. Okay. Yeah. There is a debate there. You can sit there and say, no, I want to put taxes up because capital gains tax isn't taxed properly. Okay. It's not fair. All right. We have a problem with wealth distribution, which we need to fix. Be honest about it. And if you're Dan Hannan and you're sitting there, you want to actually cut government spending, then I'm afraid you're going to have to tell me where you're going to hire them instead. And you're going to have to point out the private sector operator that's there. Where's his money coming from? And where's his employment contract? Because if you're not going to go and hire that particular person, you're just going to be throwing them on the dole, and that's not on. You can't just sit there and say we're going to throw people on the scrap heap to fix government finances, because we don't need to do it. We just need to accommodate the savings. And what's particularly interesting about this is that you sit there with a chancellor sitting there saying, we're going to have to put taxes up in the future, and we can't possibly spend any more now because we might have to put taxes up in the future. And they don't actually understand the new Keynesian theory they're actually operating under. Because the whole point about the new Keynesian theory is that fiscal policy is supposed to be passive. And the reason that the monetary authorities have dropped the interest rate is to provide a signal to the fiscal authority that they can spend. And then when they put the interest rate back up, then they're supposed to stop spending. That's actually how it's supposed to work. However, they've done exactly the same as what they always accuse MMT of doing, which is they've forgot about expectations. The Chancellor expects the interest rates to go up, so he doesn't spend. So the whole thing breaks. You see, the whole thing breaks. And so if you've got people who are talking about, putting taxes up in the future or cutting spending in the future to fix government spikes, that's just idiotic. We need to stop talking about that. We need to move on to the next thing that we're battling about. If you have the conservative mindset, then you need to start asking people how things are going to be resourced. Now, you need to don't sit there and say you can't afford it. You need to say, where are the people coming from who are going to do this thing that you want doing? If we want more nurses and doctors, where are those doctors and nurses going to come from? Don't talk about money. We know where the money comes from. It's a guy presses a button at the Bank of England, the consolidated fund gets debited, and a bank gets credited. Job done. We know where the money's coming from. We need to know where the people are coming from. What are they doing now that they won't be doing if you move them across to the public sector? It's not a free-for-all MMT. That's the key thing. MMT says essentially that you can spend the unemployed. That's all you can spend. If you've got somebody who isn't unemployed that you want to work in the public sector, you need to make them unemployed first. And there are ways of doing that. The primary one being, of course, you have to tax somebody. You don't get away with taxing things just because you've got MMT and the Bank of England behind you. You've still got to release those resources. And then similarly on the other side, if you've got somebody sitting there saying, I want to cut services, as I said earlier on, you need to explain who's going to do the hiring then. You can't just throw them out of work because, we can't afford it. Yes, we can afford it, and we should continue to afford it. But of course, that also shows you how you can reduce government spending. Hire the people. Yeah. Hire the people. That's all you need to do. Go around. If there's someone unemployed out there, hire them. That's all you need to do.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Now, you did mention a little snippet you gave. You whetted the appetite of the viewers. You mentioned that you did. Oh, yeah. And I noticed you mentioned this idea of the consolidated fund. Now, I'm going to come back to that.
We'll do that later on. We'll do that later on, because a lot of people, I've noticed a question coming in about QE and consolidated fund and the all
national,
coming soon.
All coming. So don't go away for a coffee or wait the dog. If any you want to know about how does it all work, how does this bizarre internal
you want the gory details?
System.
I can give you gory details.
Neil's your man. All right, get comfy. Well, that's coming. That all right. He's going to tell you all about QE, what it is, what it isn't. All right, and a bit about this consolidated fund that's kind of been thrown out there. It's all about that internal accounting dynamics that you're all fascinated about. Neil's the man who is going to reveal all. I think Neil used this. I'm going to steal one of his lines. It's like, that guy in The Wizard of Oz with the wheel. He's going to draw back the curtain for you.
The man behind the curtain. Behold the Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
Now, I'm coming on to my next question, and I'm going to make a little plug before we start. Warren and I have written a paper on the Weimar Republic because this is a famous, when people talk MMT, Weimar inflation, and the BBC, whenever they talk about the government spending money, they have like one of the newsreaders who looks miserable, frightened, she may even hide behind the desk. And then they have some sort of graphic of some sort of money press, with loads of fivers or tenors rolling up. And the idea is to equate, spending money to do with Weimar inflation, etc. Now, what I really want to ask Neil is, if he's talking about MMT and people mention Weimar, obviously Neil being a good friend of mine, the first thing he'll do is, you got to read that paper what Phil and Warren wrote.
That's my line. I was going to say that. You're just mixing my line.
But I'm going to say, once he said that, and then, say he's in a pub post-COVID, he's got a mate there who's intelligent, and he's, won't it lead to hyperinflation like what happened in Weimar? What would your response be, Neil, to that question?
Well, firstly, I would say to them, they need to get up to date. I mean, obviously, it's Argentina these days or Venezuela.
Absolutely.
You've got to go with something modern and situation up to date and say, what's the issue there?
Yeah.
And it's the same problem as it's basically bad pilots crash planes. Bad pilots crash planes. Does that mean that heavier than air flight is impossible? No, it doesn't. So it's time to stop listening to people who train bad pilots, because we've got a lot of people out there, IMF, cough, that train pilots as though they're driving buses. They need to learn how to fly the plane properly. That's the thing. And a lot of these things are counterintuitive, of course, because, to do an airplane stall, you've got to learn to push the stick forward, even though you feel as though you want to pull it back to go back up. You've got to learn how to steer into a skid. You've got to learn that when you're going up a ladder, you actually have to lean back to leverage your feet into the steps. These things have to be learned. You have to learn how to do these things because they're completely counterintuitive. And if you listen to the wrong people, then obviously you're gonna get it wrong and you're gonna crash. We're in a situation at the moment where Zimbabwe is hyperinflating again. Why is Zimbabwe hyperinflating again? Because they're following the IMF instructions on how to introduce a currency. They're doing it completely and utterly wrong. What have they got? High interest rates, peg currency, total disaster. Inflation goes through the roof. Of course, if currency is worth what you have to get it. If you've got an inflation problem, you need to make it scarce. Make it scarce, and your inflation will come down because people will then want it. So, you don't want to be handing out, as Warren puts it, basic income for people with money through interest. You want to cut that down, and you want to get your taxes up so that people find it difficult to get hold of it. They've got to get hold of it to pay their tax bills. Make it scarce. That's how you would introduce a currency from an M&T point of view. The IMF, they're just, interest rates at 30%, peg your currency to another currency, and then wonder why inflation goes through the roof. Makes no sense.
I mean, the IMF, my view is to close it down. I can't honestly say. It may have had some historic purpose, possibly. We won't go down that road to fix exchange rates, but now it's just like a load of people in suits with expensive pensions flying around when they're allowed to, giving very, very bad advice to particularly developing countries. So my advice is close it down along with Ofsted, but hey, I don't want to go down that.
I was reading an IMF paper the other day for my sins.
Right.
It was about the debt to GDP ratio, and they were sat there explaining how you can manage the debt to GDP ratio and when, but they never bothered going down the why route. Why do you need to bother doing it at all? And that's the problem all the way down the line. This thing was 14 pages long, loads of mathematical equations. With yet another DSG new Keynesian model in there, which you get bored reading about, and it doesn't actually tell you anything. It was just complete garbage in, garbage out, because they weren't answering the question that needed to be answered.
Yeah, I interviewed it for my book. Bit of a plug, all right, too expensive, but if you say that, I interviewed a guy called Jamie Morgan. This guy's a genius. He talks about 100 mile an hour, but boy, he's sharp. And I asked him about maths. And he just laughed because basically he's really, really, really good at maths. So what he says is that maths is an exclusion device. So all these guys at the IMF and these economists who think they can do maths, they use it to exclude ordinary people. But real mathematicians just laugh because it's got no relevance to what they're talking about. But it's just when we look at a paper full of squiggles, we think, boy, these guys must be clever.
It's exactly the same as the maths in Latin. It's reading the maths in Latin. You need an interpreter. And what MMT does, of course, is it publishes the Bible in English. And so everybody can read it, everybody can understand it, and that's the key thing. We're in the middle now of effectively an economic reformation where we've nailed our demands to the door. And the orthodoxy are on notice. They're on their last legs and they need to sharpen up or ship out.
Yeah, and they're trying to run the counter-reformation. To use your analogy, they don't like it because obviously we've blown their cover. They've been hiding behind all these maths for years, and suddenly we said, but the maths doesn't describe it. It's like biologists, I was studying the biology of a unicorn. They're very good at it, but someone's just told them, hey, mate, there is no such thing as a unicorn. It don't work. And obviously they don't like the defensive. They're earning a lot of money, aren't they, about all these things?
Well, that's it. It's that old, you'll never convince somebody whose salary depends on it that they're doing
absolutely.
Their own thing.
Now, Neil, I'd like to go down that road because we're both enjoying it and we're both agreeing with each other, which is very nice. But the next question, let's say we're back in the pub All right,
Yeah.
you've just put paid to the inflationistas, and which is your phrase. I like that. Well, they move on to the next one. They shake their hands and they shake their head. They shake everything. They go, though. Once we do anything related to MMT, the exchange rate's going to crash, and petrol will be at least £1 million a unit, and then PLC Britain will all go the cap in hand, to use Cameron's phrase, to the IMF. Yeah. So how do you get rid of the exchange rate doomsayers? How do you put paid to them next?
Yeah, the classic one is, okay, that's fine. You need to look at it from the other guy's point of view. Where's he going to sell his tomatoes? Where's that untapped reservoir of demand that's going to soak up all these tomatoes he would otherwise have sold to us? There isn't any. There isn't any anywhere. And there's an interesting thing when you do that. If you take away the demand there and you maintain the supply there, then at that point in time, you've got a massive excess supply. And it isn't just the price of the tomatoes that you would have sold to us that will collapse. It's the price of all tomatoes. We saw this earlier in the year when demand suddenly collapsed for oil. The price of oil went negative. It went negative. Yeah. So, the guys selling stuff really don't want a demand collapse, because if they have a demand collapse, they're in serious bother. They'll lose all their income. It'll all completely collapse. And the other one, of course, is that trade balances are always balanced. That's the important thing that you've always got to remember, is that for us to be able to buy something from abroad, the guy at the other side has got to have received something in exchange for it, because we have a floating rate exchange system. So they've got to have received the same thing. So fundamentally, if it wasn't balanced, the trade wouldn't have happened in the first place. If you buy the tomatoes and say, here's my groats, and the guy on the other side says, I'm not selling you tomatoes for that, they don't show up in the figures. For it to have shown up in the figures, the tomatoes had to have been sold and the sterling has to have been sent somewhere else. And the way that it works is that, take Norway, for example. Norway is my favorite one as an example for this. What does Norway do? Norway ships out oil and the odd salmon in exchange for financial assets. They don't actually want things. They want financial assets. Why? Because they want to stick it in their magic sovereign wealth fund. The sovereign wealth fund of Norway is locked. It can never be used. None of that in there can ever be spent. It's effectively a big strong box where they just throw things in and shut the thing, lock it, and that's it. Okay, and that's to avoid a Dutch disease problem. They don't want the Norwegian economy to blow itself to bits like the Venezuelan one, so that they're locking it away. But they want to do all this exporting to employ people. So they have this sovereign wealth fund sat on the left-hand side of the balance sheet, and that means they can discount it into their own currency, krona, on the liabilities side. So you have this situation when we have an imbalanced trade deficit situation where the Norwegians actually want the financial assets so that they can make it look like when they issue their own money, they're not actually issuing it out of thin air. Okay, It's nothing more than a trick. Okay, it's a trick. We're issuing it against hard currency, which is on the asset side of the balance sheet. Now that causes us a problem because they're draining our sterling. They're draining our sterling. And of course, we're now in this situation where we're short of sterling going into our economy. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to accommodate it by just doing some more government spending or cutting some taxes to keep the circulation going. It's not just Norway that does it. Obviously, China is an absolute classic case of just basically taking a whole load of dollars and sticking it in a strong box somewhere and discounting it for yuan. And the Denmark does pretty much the same sort of thing, but they tend to use pensions as a way of locking it. So you always find this situation when this money gets sent abroad is that they can't just dump it and spend it because it's already locked on the balance sheets of their central bank. They would have to have a Damascus, revolution, if you like, to understand that they don't need these things on the left-hand side of the balance sheet, and they can just issue it against other assets. Imports are a real benefit. Exports are a real cost. Export-led growth is mercantile by definition. What they're trying to do is they're trying to sell their stuff abroad. They're draining the money from you so that you can't have internal demand, which increases the amount of demand for their exports and your imports. And so you get this feedback loop. And we can fix that very simply by just stuffing them with as much paper as they can eat. If they want paper, we can make it. It costs nothing to produce. Just give them it. Let them have it. That's fine. That's what they want. So that's fine. You have to remember that our money is an export product. Savings is an export product. That's what we sell. The Norwegians sell us oil, and we give them sterling financial assets that they can stick in a strong box and then discount into krona to make it look as though they're not issuing money out of nothing.
Yeah.
Fair exchange works.
Yeah, well, that sounds. I mean, Norway's got, I think it's top of the HDI. So, their plan must work to some extent, assuming it's.
Well, the thing is that the export-led growth people have it looks right. That's about it. It looks like you're doing the right thing. Whereas if you come from the other side, there's got to be somebody who is the inverse of it, because everything's got to sum to zero. In the UK, we're the opposite, and that looks wrong. It's nothing more than it's just because just learn some accountancy and understand that things sometimes look upside down.
Well, the thing is, when I interviewed a few mainstreamers, sorry to mention the book, the overpriced book, but they just look down the nose at accountancy. I don't think you can learn anything from accountancy. They go. I mean, the problem with that, they think themselves above it. They're on a bridge watching the accountants below sailing around. But unfortunately, I'm not saying accountancy is everything, but it's a very valuable element, and it lets them know they're making a big mistake. Anyway, I must press on, Neil, because I'm looking at the clock, and we've got a bit more to do.
Now, we're not going to get through these 100 questions.
I know these 185. Yeah, that's right. Now, the next one, I know you're a real thinker as regards the UBI versus the job guarantee, the importance of paid work. This is where I first really come across a lot of your work when you've been talking about that. Now, obviously, in terms of summary, we could talk about the job guarantee for the whole of the session. Easily, but just giving a summary, what's your view of job guarantee versus UBI? Why is work so important, or the opportunity to contribute so important?
Right. The way I've been looking at doing this recently is let's start with the job guarantee. Okay, the job guarantee in the UK works like this. We already have one, or we've got half of one. It's called universal credit. Okay, universal credit has work coaches in there, which require people to spend 35 hours a week looking for jobs that can't possibly exist. That's actually the default job and for which they get, I don't know, £4,500 a year, I think it is. So that's actually the job guarantee we've got. It's not perfect because you can't choose to go on it. Not that anybody would want to choose to go on a £4,500 a year job, but there we go. You can't choose to go on it. So it's not perfect, but we do have one. So actually altering the UK into a job guarantee is very easy. We're very, very close to both MMT and job guarantee in this country. There's not a lot of tweaking required to make it work. So the way that I've been doing this is I say, okay, that's fine. Let's take a job guarantee and let's create a UBI with it. Very simple. Okay. On a job guarantee, you file a timesheet doing some work with somebody, and then you get paid by the central government. So what we'll do is we'll make that work nothing. We'll make that work. You can file whatever you like. You can write your 8 hours a day down, doing whatever it is you want. You can file that timesheet. It'll be signed off and it'll be paid. Okay. So just imagine that situation where you've got a job guarantee where you can just do that. So we're in that situation where people are getting paid essentially for doing whatever they feel like. Okay. Now imagine that you're a private sector employer and you want to hire people off that job. How much above the wage are you going to have to pay to get those people to come off that job onto the job that you want them to do? And what you end up with is a gap, a differential. Okay. If you're doing that differential, and there's two ways that they can fix that. Okay. They can reduce the quality of the job, how much intensity they want for the job, so that their job is more like doing nothing. Or they can put the wage up to try and attract people away from it. Or on the other side, you can increase the intensity of the job on the job guarantee to match it. And what you're doing is you're always trying to reduce this gap between what the private sector has to pay to get people off the job guarantee and what the job guarantee pays. And we can see that now within the system because, as I've said, the universal credit pays £4,500 a year and the minimum wage is £18,500 a year. So you've got a gap. See, that's the thing. So it's this gap that UBI causes. And that gap has to be filled with output. That's how much money you're having to pay extra to fill that particular gap. And somebody's actually got to do the work to create the stuff that fills that particular gap, you see. I always find it when I'm talking about UBI these days is that, everybody accuses MMT of being the magic money tree. Well, the UBI requires a magic porridge pot. It has to be a mechanism by which this stuff is actually created, and somebody's actually got to do the work. UBI always ends up being a transfer. It's like a pension. There's always somebody who has to do the work and then give up that work for nothing material in exchange, transfer it to somebody who doesn't want to work for a living. And so it's like a pension. Pensions are always a current production transfer. This idea that you can save up for a pension is like the idea that you can put a jumper on in August and save heat for January. It's just a completely impossible idea. The whole of the pension industry is another one of these Wizard of Oz illusions. Creating this idea that you can save up and then you spend it down when you get older. It's like no, not really. What happens is that whenever you pay into the pensions, you're paying the pensions of the people who are drawing pensions today. It's a straightforward pass-through transfer all the time, which means when you or I or anybody else who's watching this gets to pension age, you better make sure that there's enough people paying the tax, as it were, making the stuff that they can transfer to you. And it's the same with the UBI. There's a transfer there. Whereas if you have a job guarantee and people are actually producing something, then at that particular point in time, the output from that job guarantee is what you get in exchange for the transfer of goods to things. To the people on the job guarantee. There's a line by Muhammad Ali, which I'm very fond of, which is service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. I think that's embodies it in a very short phrase. Work that you have to do is your contribution to society. When we put money out there and we do taxation, we create unemployment. And therefore, it means that people cannot contribute to society, and we have to have a mechanism by which they're allowed to add their contribution to society. And it's something that's going to become increasingly important, of course, because the task of the private sector is to put us all out of a job and automate everything.
Now that, Neil, brings you to my next question. I'm gonna pop that in because I think you know what's coming. Because every 10 years since about 1800, people talk about automation's going to take away all our jobs, and some of the kids are saying that, all the college students, and I was saying, but technology creates more jobs than it takes away. Particularly being in a school, when I started teaching in the 80s, you had teachers, dinner ladies, secretaries, and a big bearded bloke with a massive bunch of keys and a brown coat. That's all. Now in a college, there's millions of people walking about. I said, who's he? He's the website manager. He's the business manager. He's an IT technician. And now going online, we've got loads of technicians. So the question really is, having fed you that line, how are we going to deal with this supposed automation problem that's going to mean we're all unemployed by yesterday?
Yeah. I mean, I think Warren dealt with this when we on the last interview very, very well. It was a wonderful system of just imagine that you were given money to hire an assistant, and who wouldn't want an assistant? And of course, if you get that, then you'll find that you can't hire an assistant because everybody wants to hire one. So there's obviously a shortage of people to do the jobs. Yeah. So, he deals with it very, very simply indeed. There's the problem is not that there isn't things to do. The problem is that there's nobody to pay the wages for them. And that's the key thing. There are things that need to be done that other people would consider to be a useful use of time. And all we need to do is join those two things together and then just fund it. Yeah. That's actually the exchange. The exchange is that, I'm quite happy to spend another 3 hours a day creating this bread, this house, this water service, as long as you spend 8 hours a day cleaning this or sorting that out or typing this in. That's the exchange. There's always plenty to do. Yeah. And obviously, if we get to the point where we really are struggling for things to do, then guess what? We retire people earlier. It's just, we retire people earlier. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous, particularly given what's happened over the last 9 months, where it's crystal clear that we can maintain quite a lot of the population out of work. for a long period of time. Why on earth is the retirement age going up from 65 to 66, 67, 68, and so on and so forth? You know, anybody who's young today is going to be sat there looking at it and thinking, I'm going to be 85 before I get to draw my pension, you know? Assuming COVID don't get me first, you know?
Yeah, well, we mentioned the dreaded COVID.
Yeah, sorry, I had to slip that one in.
I'm going to just give you, I might blend two questions in because you might want to run them in together, maybe. Yeah. Firstly, in terms of student finances, you know, how I know you don't think much of the loan system. So what I know that, I mean, your face tells a story there, Neil, you know. So I know that you'll have an idea about how to fund our young people going to university, the importance of that. And also, related to that, the whole tax funding system, you might have an idea about how you'd like to sort of restructure taxes. So again, keeping a bit of an eye on the clock, you know, if you've got 5 minutes.
I'll try and keep it short. Sorry, I'm rambling. Okay, that's fine.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great.
Yeah, I mean, higher education is funded now in exactly the same way as it was in the 1970s and 1980s and everything. They never changed it. Yeah. Higher education is funded by essentially somebody at the Bank of England going, we'll mark that one up, we'll mark that one down, we'll send some money to a university. That's how it's paid. And it always has been. And the whole thing with the student loans is yet another one of these wonderful illusions. Student loans don't exist. They quite literally do not exist. I can tell you why they don't exist. You go onto the company's house, you draw up the accounts of the student loan company, and you'll find that it's technically insolvent. And the reason it's technically insolvent is because it doesn't actually have any assets on the balance sheet. And the reason it doesn't have any assets on the balance sheet is because what it does is not recognized under accounting principles as loans. So it has no, it actually it says in there, it's really funny, it says that this thing is basically funded by the Department of Education, and that's means that we don't have to write a little note on the audit saying that it's bust. But yeah, so the student loan company is a complete fraud. It is just a list of people that you can tax more than other people. That's it. All the calculations and interest rates and all the rest of it is all just smoke and mirrors. It's a list of people that you can charge 9% more for at some point. And so are you just scrappable? It's just a total waste of time. Complete waste of time. It doesn't do anything. It's just it's nothing more than, you know, it should be give them a tax cut. You know, they've spent 4 years working to improve themselves. Christ, that's the least we can do. I mean, I would go further than that. I mean, why isn't it an apprenticeship? What's the difference? You know, you're going to university, you turn up, you do your 8 hours a day, whatever it is, you get your timesheet signed, you should be paid for it. You know, it should be a paid thing. It's an apprenticeship. It's exactly the same. And the thing about it is, if you try and do it on the capital funding side, where people have to borrow and all the rest of it, then we end up paying for it anyway, because it just gets passed through into professional charges. These people are going to be going to the talent economy, in theory. They're going to be doctors and nurses and engineers and all the rest of it. So they're going to sit there and say, well, I've got to pay off this loan. So they're just going to pass it straight through in wages. So we're already paying now. You are already paying a tax in everything that you buy, because we've got loans to pay off. And the only people who win out of that are banks. You know, as usual, the bankers.
Well, you know about that. And the tax system then, Neil, I'll just nudge you onto that point.
Yeah, let's say, I'll just small slurp. Sorry, I'm driving.
No, I'm going to have a glass of water before you talk about taxes.
Taxes, yes. We need to stop talking about taxes so much, really, honestly. Yeah. Okay, let me give you a simple analogy, okay? Water management. Yeah. Everybody likes talking about clean drinking water, okay? Nobody likes to talk about the other half, which is sewage management.
Yeah.
Why? Because what we want with sewage management, essentially what we want is we want it to be dealt with as quickly and as cleanly as possible without ever having to think about the gory details. Okay.
Yes.
Same with tax. Okay. You just want it to be done and you want it to go away and you don't want to have to think about it, because nobody likes paying tax. First rule, nobody likes paying it. They like it when other people pay it, but they don't want to pay it themselves. And of course, that is a fallacy of composition. Okay, it's got to be fair, it's got to be simple, and it's just got to get done and get out of the way. Okay, so tax has to be easy to collect. It's got to be easy to collect. Okay, it's got to be early to collect, and it's got to be impossible to avoid if it's actually going to release the resources that the government wants to use to deliver its public program. And obviously so that it operates correctly as a secondary stabilizer. For example, good old Rishi decides to delay VAT for 9 months. Well, what does that do to the secondary automatic stabilizers? You see, it's just, it just cripples the things. So if things start to pick back up now, he's got a lot of VAT there that he's going to have to pull back at some point in time. That's going to cause a massive drain, probably at the wrong time. He should, rather than sitting there saying you can delay paying your VAT, he should have cut the rate of VAT down to 17.5% or 15% to help people out. And the very important thing about tax is that you can't avoid it and you must pay it. So tax evasion is a very serious offence. And in my view, it should always require jail time. You should always do jail time if you're into tax evasion. And now that also means that your tax system has to be simple so that tax evasion is absolutely crystal clear. You can't possibly get away with this idea as, I didn't really know what it said. If it's just, you pay 20% on your income, then, or you're 40% on your income or 60% on your income, it's absolutely crystal clear that you're evading tax if you dodge that. Tax avoidance is essentially nature's way of telling you your tax system is too complicated. So if you've got anybody avoiding tax, then your tax system is too complex. I go with exactly what Warren said last week on this one. Income tax and corporation tax are just too difficult to collect. We need to get rid of them, and we need to come up with something that's far, far simpler, far easier to deal with, and just makes the thing go away. And the way that I would do it is I would change the calculation system that we have to be the way that we actually pay things. Most people in this country don't pay any tax. PAYE deals with it. The employer deals with it all. So the employer is paying over a chunk of money. So what we do is we calculate it so that we change the calculation so that you never see it. Your salary is this, your employer pays so much on the salary and they just transfer it over and you don't even see it. And the same with VAT on the other side, you just don't see it, make it go away. That way then it's just like sewage. You don't see it, it just happens.
yeah.
It just happens. And of course, on top of that, we need to retain a local property tax, which should be on the current value, not a value from 1991 that we've invented. It's fairly straightforward. They do it on the business side. It's just the current rental value. It's not particularly difficult to do. And when you create that system where people can't see the taxation, it makes it easier to raise them. It makes it easier to lower them. There's less resistance politically, and you can target it at what's required. If we need doctors and nurses, we need to target those people who are currently buying doctors and nurses outside the NHS and free them up so the NHS can buy them. That's what a tax system is there to do. And we need to make it easy for people to do that without everybody sitting there. The right wing likes to make taxes visible, because when you make taxes visible, it makes it very difficult to raise them. From our point of view, we really ought to be making them go away as much as possibly can so we can actually move them and target things a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. Thank you. Now then, Neil, this is the moment all the viewers and this has been waiting for. This is the big one. This is where a little introduction to it. Very briefly, when I was teaching in the 1980s, all right, we had a video called Inside the Bank of England. Now, I've mentioned snippets before, the guy with the top hat I mentioned before from the Grand Union who went to the thing and, put his 19th century top coat and got the money. One of my favourites, the kids loved it, is there was a little room and some guy in a suit, got a little tin box and he opened it up just to check whether the £5 million note was still in there. Having contented himself with its presence, he then closed it, locked it up and put it back where he got it from. Now, the thing is, I just throw that there's a lot of internal accounting mystery to the Wizard of Oz. Now, the thing is, I know that, you know a bit about these funds and the internal accounting chicanery. Now, you can be as amusing as you want. You can combine amusing anecdotes with detailed accounting analysis. How would you, to all these people who are worried about the country being bankrupt, where does the money come from? How does it all work? This is the people are hanging on the edge of the seats about these funds, Neil. So this is your moment. I'm going to hand over to you. What's the deal with this internal accounting? What's
the deal with it? Okay, so, well, our system has grown up, as you can probably imagine, basically the entire the entire Bank of England and government payment system is very much like changing of the guard at the palace. It's one of those things where people walk around in doing strange things that don't make any sense anymore because of tradition. A bit like if you've ever been into a court, everybody still wears horsehair wigs and all the rest of it. It's all completely ridiculous. And the government's payment system is very similar. Okay, it's very similar. They've tried to modernise it, we haven't quite got there yet. Okay, so what we have is we have warts on warts on warts, and these things just grow over time. Essentially, the government spends from a fund which is a bank account at the Bank of England called the Consolidated Fund, and the Consolidated Fund is just an account at the Bank of England, and when the Exchequer wants to pay anything out, they do a transfer from the Consolidated Fund to what's called the Government Banking Service, and transfer it to there, and then the Government Banking Service effectively does all the payments from it, and that's about it. So it's a straightforward debit of the Consolidated Fund, and then the credit of another Government Banking Service account, and then when they then distribute it out to all the various commercial banks, so they make lots of backs payments. It's sort of interesting in that the back system has got three grades of payments. There's what's called consumer grade, which is what you and I get to use. There's banking grade, which is what the banks get to use, and then there's government grade, which is the grade 3, as they call it. Finding out about this is an absolute nightmare. I mean, the guys that have spent ages looking at these things, they deserve medals for having to go through all this lot, trying to get the Treasury to admit what's going on. And the way that government grade 3 works, and it's really quite funny, is it's a normal bank account, but it has a contra at the Bank of England. So when you actually pay out of a bank account, it doesn't pay out of that bank account, it pays out of one at the Bank of England. So whenever government pays anything, it always pays from the Bank of England. So there's no messing around in the commercial bank structure. Of course, it fits absolutely 100% with the way that MMT works. And of course, there is legislation. I can't actually quite remember what it is. It's the 1866 something or other Exchequer Act. I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's that effectively that piece of legislation is still active, and that states pretty clearly that the Bank of England cannot refuse any instruction from the Treasury to make payments. So there is nobody at the Bank of England who is empowered to bounce any checks. So that's the end of that. So all that actually happens, the Consolidated Fund every day goes overdrawn, and that goes onto the left-hand side of the balance sheet of the Bank of England. The commercial banks get a liability which balances it, and that's how government payments are done. Then at the end of the day, we then go through a whole rigmarole of chicanery.
I like that. Rigmarole of chicanery. I'm going to take that away with me, Neil, as we all are. Sorry to interrupt your flow there. Yeah,
and it's just, honestly, so we have this thing called the National Loans Fund.
I've heard of that.
The National Loans Fund is where gilts live. That's all gilts are liabilities of the National Loan Fund. That's not important right now, as somebody said once. And we have we've got this stupid situation where we have this National Loan Fund, which is essentially the balance sheet part of the Consolidated Fund that they broke out in 1968 for reasons which we can't quite get to the bottom of. So you have this situation where you have two bank accounts at the Bank of England, one of which is the income and expenses account, and another one which is the asset and liability account. We don't know why. It just obviously seemed like a good idea at the time. And then in the middle of the 90s, then Gordon Brown came in, and obviously Gordon Brown did what he normally did, which is to make everything ridiculously complicated for no damn good reason at all. And so he added yet another account to that, which is called the debt management account. So we now have the situation where the Consolidated Fund overdraws, that then draws from the National Loan Fund, which overdraws, and then that then draws from the debt management account, which a bunch of people at the debt management office then try and send gilts out into the marketplace to collect back the money they've already injected. So you have this ridiculous situation at the moment, particularly at the moment when we're doing QE like Billio, where the DMO is throwing gilts into the market and the Bank of England's quickly taking them out as fast as they can, as fast as they go in there. So the whole thing's totally, completely, and utterly ridiculous. I mean, we could scrap all that, or we could go back to the Consolidated Fund. We just let it overdraw and job done.
Now, Neil,
all these other things are just smoke and mirrors. Really.
Now, I believe that there is a paper on the website. For those who have really enjoyed that humorous tour through the smoke and mirrors. Now, it's
I didn't even go into the government banking service.
Oh, well, the thing is, we've got to save something for next time. Now, the thing is, in the context of all that, we have the dreaded two letters. You know it's coming, Neil, QE. Now, there's a lot of, shall we say, things on the internet from people who should know better. I'm not going to go into that. Trying to tell us QEs are borrowing from other government or other such nonsense. Now, what I'm going to do then is, in a short essence, and I know you really don't want to talk anymore about QE, if you like me, but I am noticing in chat the two letters are appearing. So QE. What is it and QE. What is it not?
All right, let's see. QE is very simple. Okay, QE is an asset swap. It's an exchange of liabilities of the National Loan Fund, gilts, for liabilities of the Bank of England banking department, commercial reserves. That's it. Okay, that's all it is. Okay, and all it does is it returns the system to the state it would have been if government had just spent on the consolidated fund and we'd not done all this nonsense in the first place. So, it functionally, if you want it in gory terms, it's swapping fixed interest government debt for floating rate government debt. That's actually the functional operational mechanism. So you have this strange situation you've got at the moment where quantitative easing is adding reserves to the system to try and boost lending. As we know, that's the boost lending. And now we're talking about reducing interest rates to drain those reserves, and that's apparently to boost lending as well. Which kind of tells you that neither of them actually boosting lending, which is funny enough. What the actual empirical evidence tells you is that it doesn't do anything with lending. What they're doing is they're manipulating the yield curve in the belief that this thing that it has some effect. And again, it's all Wizard of Oz stuff. It's just they're all trying expectational management and nudge theory and all that nonsense. Why anybody would believe that this does anything, I don't know. It just takes income out of the system, as far as I can see. That seems to be it.
I'd agree with that. And my pet hate, I mean, I have many, is the famous, I've mentioned before, that awful graphic that the media put with that blooming printing press. I mean, I mean, they ought to be sacked for that. I would just get any pub, any newspaper, any reporter.
What's really funny about that is when they print that money like that, okay, that's also an asset swap. Okay?
Yes.
When you put the money into the system, the reserves go out. The banks have to buy that stuff with reserves. Yeah. So that's also, when they print that stuff, it's like, yes, it's QE, okay, that's fine, because they've got to give the bank reserves back. It's a swap, okay? They're then swapping something with a floating rate debt for something that doesn't have any interest on it at all. Yeah. It's the same thing. Yeah. Drives me up the wall. It really does.
Yeah. Anyway, we be like two grumpy old men wearing exactly the same shirt, all right, moaning about exactly the same thing. Now, I'd like to thank you for that. Obviously, there'll be other questions people have got. Please go to the website. It's all there. All right. You can always...
And negative interest rates now. Don't forget, we're doing
negative interest rates now.
We've done that.
I'll let you have a little word about negative interest rates. Now, Neil, I know that it's a favourite topic of yours, so we don't want to... I'm keeping an eye on the clock. Negative interest rates. And then we'll go on to something more exciting.
Yeah, negative interest rates. Okay, you'll get lots of things about negative interest rates, about how they're going to pay for bank lending and all that sort of stuff. That isn't going to happen, okay? Right. The whole point about negative interest rates, it's about dislodging firms with cash piles and trying to nudge them into actually buying investments. That's what negative interest rates are there to do. They can't go very much below zero, because if they go very much below zero, then people do start getting paid for borrowing money and then all hell breaks loose. At that point in time, as you rightly pointed out in your wonderful paper, Phil.
Thank you. Lovely. That's what we want. Yeah.
But, at that point in time, you end up with a big, massive drain, and the drain becomes more than the injections from the borrowing the money, and oh dear, things go to hell in a handcart very quickly. So yes, it's about dislodging firms with cash piles. They can. Banks effectively get charged some money for leaving reserves on deposit. They then pass that charge through to people, to commercial operations that are outside the deposit guarantee scheme. They won't pass it on to retail people, because retail people have got the option to go to cash. They've got the option to go to national savings. And obviously, it would look really bad on your marketing, particularly if you think that as most banks do, that your business is not actually lending money, it's flogging crap insurance products to Muppet. Okay, which I can tell you now is actually a lot of banks' business model. Okay. And then they find out that people are smarter than they are, and then they get themselves into really serious trouble. But those meetings are fun, but we won't go into that. So negative interest rates, dislodging firms with cash piles, trying to get them to invest early. There's a problem with doing that, okay? It's the usual thing of it's that they've got a pile of money and they buy a lot of things that are wrong, that don't actually do what needs to be done, it can go very sour very quickly. It is the final roll of the dice, I think.
Yeah.
Once that's gone, there's nothing left in the tank.
Right. Now, Neil, I'm going to come to broader things, and I just want to give you a bit of scope just to air a few potential things you may have been thinking about. Now, one of them is, you'll notice, if we shelving the COVID crisis, once we move past that, there's a great wringing of hands about Brexit trade deals, and if we don't get one, we might as well shut the economy because there'll be no more camembert. I tried a bit of French accent there just to keep it awake. The sauterne is going to be through the roof if we can get it. So basically, Britain's finished without a trade deal with Canada or something. So, what's your view of the whole Brexit trade deal? Panicking? Is there anything in it, or should we just shelve that? And once you've done that, the other thing is to move on to one of your favourite topics, living up in the north as you do, Scotland, independence. If it happens, should they have their own money? You might want to link the EU in with that. That's what, or you can do with them separately. The floor is yours, Neil.
Floor is mine. Thank you. Yes, well directed.
Yeah.
So trade deals are nice to have, for my view. WTO will be fine. We have a floating rate currency. Have I mentioned that?
Yeah. You think so?
I think I might have mentioned we've got a floating rate currency. Using fixed exchange rate theory on floating rate currencies. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Keep calm. Calm thoughts. So World Trade Organization perfectly fine. Why? Because that's supposed to be the default trade deal that everybody uses, so we don't have 1,000 of them. I mean, really, can we just fix the problem? Root cause, sort it out. So what we would do in this country, we've removed ourselves from the EU financial straitjacket. We've got rid of Article 1, 2, 3. We've got the freedom to go where we want to go. We can control as borders. We can control as trades. And we know that imports are a real benefit, exports are a real cost. And so why are we issuing import tariffs? What's the point? How many oranges do we grow in this country? No point having tariffs on oranges, then we scrap them. We just need to get rid of those import tariffs. And the reason is because the currency area that imposes the tariff in a floating rate system is the one that pays for it. So, if the EU want to put tariffs on that, all they're doing is taxing people. They're trying to impose tariffs and trying to encourage internal substitution within their area. That's fine. We'll just sell stuff somewhere else. They've still got to sell their tomatoes to us. And so they're going to have to buy something, or their currency will move out, and their tomato growers, because they're in competition with everybody else in the rest of the world, will have to stand a loss as the currency moves against them. So we should eliminate all inbound tariffs. They're irrelevant taxes. That cuts down on border friction. It gets rid of this problem that we've got, that everybody's worried about will the lorries come in? It's just wave them through. Sale of Goods Act, labelling, standards get bound down the supply chain. Supermarkets are not going to go around buying chlorinated chicken because their customers don't want it. If that's labelled, nobody's going to buy it. Okay? Or we give them the choice, and then those people that don't want to buy it, we go shop at Waitrose or whatever, they'll have to buy it. And those who go to Iceland, like I do, get the cheap stuff.
That's the shop, not the country, by the way.
Yes, I know. I was going to use that joke. Will you stop?
Oh, sorry, twice I've scuppered you. Yeah, it's the shirt that's doing it. I'm nailing your joke. Sorry, Neil.
Honestly, I'd teed that one up, and you're moving nicked.
You are. I'm sorry.
And that ensured the standards bind down the supply chain. We can. There's this idea that borders in some way have to be some sort of a hard shell, and the things that go over the borders are somehow, and then you have a soft body. That's not the only way you can design it. You can design the things so that you don't have the hard shell. You just have things coming in there, and there's restrictions within the system, particularly consumer protection restrictions, so that if something's not to standard, you push the cost back onto the supplier. We have quite good ones of those in this country, I think. They're quite powerful, and obviously now we're outside the EU, we can make them more powerful if necessary to bind those things down. We don't need to have big border checking. That should be, phytosanitary stuff, the sort of things that are the sort of things that are kind of important, that we don't let things in that are likely to cause disease and the like. That's actually what we need to do at the border. Everything else, I think, can be handled by supply chain. And as to Scotland, well,
I'll get comfy for this. Come on.
Yeah. Well, they want to rejoin the EU, so it doesn't really matter, does it? There you go.
Thank you. Next. And do you think, what's your view on if they went back in, I mean, do you think that they want to, or is your feeling to guesswork? Say they got back in as a separate country. I don't know whether they can or they can't. You can comment on that. Do you think they want to get the euro?
Yeah.
Do they want to keep the pound, or do they want to have a new Scottish currency? What's your feeling as what they want to do, what they might do, and dare I say what they should do?
I have no idea, really. I mean, the killer is rejoining the EU. Once you've done that, then it doesn't matter what currency system you use. You're locked into that structure. And you can see that with the way that the Danish are. They have their own currency. They're locked down. Poles are the same. It's the same problem. They can't do anything very much with it. Because you're constantly constrained by the European Union system, particularly if you're inside their Stability and Growth Pact. It's the EU needs to decide whether it wants to become a country or not, and whether people in Scotland want to go and join that country as opposed to this country. It's as simple as that.
Would you agree with me that Stability and Growth Pact is probably one of the worst named pacts, or indeed worst named anything? It's like
Good marketing, though, isn't it?
Hey, it's great. I mean, I like all these little names. I mean, I heard a story. I don't know whether it's true or not. That when they were doing the Stability and Growth Pact, it might be apocryphal. Yeah. But they were trying to work out, what the agreed deficit would be, and some bloke in France in an office said. Well, 2 sounds a touch too small. Yeah. 4, well, that sounds a bit plus grand, je crois. So they went for trois. Now,
that's right. Yeah.
I don't know if it's true. I want to think it is, and it kind of fits. But if that's a growth pact, well, I really am a Dutchman, and I've done my family tree. I'm back to 1600, and there's no sound of the Netherlands
there at all. No. My family tree is full of people who shovel horse manure, so that's.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's the ones that we know. There's quite a lot of unknowns in there as well. But
right, I've got a few of those, but we won't go into that.
Well, we come from backgrounds where try before you buy was very popular, so it's.
Yeah. Well, I'm an Armstrong, and our record is, I'm afraid to mention the Scotland, we are what's called the Border Reivers. And my family, apparently, so they say, used to raid England during the night and steal all their cattle and stuff, and then go to another part of England during the day and then flog it to another market. So the King of Scotland decided to kill the leader and scatter the clan all over the world, including America, and as you know, Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon. All right, so but we won't go into that.
That's the story.
That's the story. Now, my final question on the list, which should time nicely to about 1:15 to give people time for questions.
Time for questions.
We have. I've timed it seamlessly.
Yeah, almost like we had a plan that, Phil. It's amazing.
If we look at all the activists out there, and the people that are tuning in now, they'll have been inspired by your answers, some fantastic information. Honestly, joking apart, it's been great talking to you. I've learned a lot. I know that the people tuning in will have done so. What would be your advice? I know you may be reluctant to give any advice, but if you're giving advice out there to the activists, the guys who are looking at the Gims site and following me on Twitter, or, you know what I mean? I haven't got many followers, but what should their attitude be to dealing with political parties and Labour, Green? What about pressure groups? Where should they be putting their sort of activism? What would you recommend they be doing if they want to kind of push the MMT thing, get involved in it? Where would you be thinking? What should they be doing?
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm talking about this from our point of view from the UK.
From UK point of view.
From the UK point of view, because obviously you've had that the views from other people on that one. From my view, I think the deficit battle is won. We've won that one, and anybody who tries to go back on that now just is increasingly looking like a crank.
Yeah.
Because they are a crank. It's as simple as that. So, be gentle with them. Okay. They know not what they do.
Yes.
All that. And we're in a mopping up operation now where essentially those people need to be quietly sidelined, and the people who say, we understand where you're coming from now, those need to be, give them some time. It's starting to happen on all sides of the equation. It's undeniable. There's no mechanism. When they sit there and say, oh, yeah, interest rates are going to go up, you just go, what mechanism have you got for interest rates to go up? Well, the market will demand interest rates to go up. It's like, okay, that's fantastic. Then that means the price of bonds will have to go down, which means that the Bank of England will just simply buy it out of existence. So how are those interest rates going to go up again? And they can't answer it. And they either accept it or they start throwing wobblies, or they segue, as they say, or they move sideways across onto the new front, and this is where the battle starts now.
Yeah.
From a UK point of view, it's always going to be trade balance and currency crisis. The reason it's currency crisis is because everybody can start say, 1976 IMF came. Even though when you look at the historical record, there was no need for any of that.
Yeah.
There was no need for it. It was entirely a mistake by a bunch of people who still thought we had a fixed exchange rate, who still thought that we could do the devaluing in the same way as had been done in the 60s. They were out of date. They were out of paradigm. And just like the hyperinflation in Weimar, it becomes a myth, and we're going to get hit with that. So you need to know the story of Healy. Okay, you need to know that story. You need to know how the trade balance works. You need to know why Norway wants financial assets, not stuff. You need to be able to explain why Argentina and all the rest of it are going mad. Why? Because they listen to the IMF again. Honestly, they've caused more trouble. They really have. Yeah. And that we're fighting this without the US at our side this time, because obviously the US gets a free pass because they've got the reserve currency, which again is a complete myth. The reserve currency is just lots of people saving in dollars, just like lots of people saving in pounds. It doesn't matter where they are; you have to save it in dollars. So the US gets a free pass on this, so you won't get any assistance from the US MMT people. They don't tend to worry too much about currency crisis because nobody talks about it. It's accepted. But I think most importantly, we need to learn to talk to the other side. The job now is one of being a missionary, which means effectively being eaten by cannibals. Yeah, that's just the way it goes. If we want MMT to be the hegemony, the new hegemony, we need to be talking about stuff and not money, and we need to be getting the other side to start talking about stuff and not money. Sitting there and saying you can't afford it is just not. You just got to laugh at them and say, "Of course we can afford it." You need to be asking me where my resources are coming from. What are they currently doing now? It's real crowding out that's the issue. It's not financial crowding out is a complete myth, and we can just forget about it. And if we do that and we start talking to people who perhaps we don't sit as easy with politically, then we can perhaps relegate mainstream economics to the same backwater that Austrian economics currently occupies. A bunch of cranks in the corner talking about how flex prices all magically sort out. It's like, all right, that's fine. Did you go to work this morning? Did you bid for your job this morning? No?
Yeah. And do you do it every day, every morning?
Every morning, we're like dock workers. We have to go in there and ask whether there's any work for us this morning.
And there's a guy in the sky. I don't know if you're burdened with an economics education. I hope
No, I'm an engineer, not an economist.
Oh, well, I work with engineers.
I haven't got the beard, you see.
Mine's growing a bit. I'm half in. But apparently, the guy that decided all that, just for the odds, a guy called Valra or Valras, depending whether you want to put the S on. And he didn't really know. He knew that you could have a set of prices which cleared the market, but you didn't really know where it came from. So he said it comes from a thing called tâtonnement, which it means groping. So apparently he invented some sort of mythical being in the sky that every day casts down the right prices. So that's what the Austrians said. Well, we don't have to do it because this guy, we don't know who he is, like Father Christmas. How does he get round all the houses and all the children's presents? Any children watching? Santa Claus will deliver. He's got a very fast little, cart and everything. Don't worry about it. But in tâtonnement, you just cast them down. The crazy gang, they're out there. And let's put the mainstreamers in there too. And hopefully we can kind of move on where MMT, as Warren says, is the new mainstream.
It needs to be the new mainstream. We need to start getting those debates, those political debates, onto the correct platform, which is there are resources out there. How do we use them most effectively? And if the reason why I want the other side on board is the same reason why you want a good defense lawyer when you're doing a murder case, is it makes the conviction sound. Okay. If you've debated these things rather than trying to hide them, they are more likely to embed and stay in place full term. Otherwise, all that'll happen is you'll start doing something, and then the next time round you'll get voted out, and it'll just get reversed again. And you've got to be we've got to be very careful about that. We need to have these correct political debates so that things go in sensibly.
Yeah. Now, Neil, I'm going to stop you. That's fantastic.
Right.
I've really enjoyed it. We've got 10 minutes left now.
10 minutes left. I'm going to have to go off script now. This is where it goes downhill rapidly.
Well, no. I mean, once, as Frank Friedman is a mate of mine from Twitter, he's asked a question, which is about Marx, really. How do you get the Marxists to listen to you, really? I mean, the guys who've got big hearts and they want to make the world better, but they just can't get a handle on MMT.
They can't get their head around these. This is the thing about these savings. And the monetarists are the same. So that it's not just the Marxists. The monetarists have exactly the same problem. There are those out there who can get their head around it. There are some monetarists who understand that some savings effectively just sit there and they don't do anything. And therefore you don't include those in the calculations. And funny enough, when you do that, particularly in America, you'll find that you can actually detect a pattern. So much so you can actually make money doing it if you know what you're doing. It doesn't work in the UK because we know how to do banking properly, but in America, in the US, they still have structural rigidities that you can actually trade, as long as you know, as a monetarist, that you know that some savings don't bite, and that's the same problem the Marxists have got. Is they just can't get their head around this fact, and I think it's to do. I don't know quite why. When you talk to them, it's very difficult to work out whether they're still thinking in commodity terms or whether they're thinking in credit and monetary terms or not. You've got to try and see whether you can persuade them that there's some savings that just don't go around in a circle, and you don't need to confiscate them because you can just accommodate them in the monetary system. That's the key to it. I'll be honest, I've not had a huge amount of success when you're talking to absolute Marxists. They have, by definition, almost they're very. How can I put this politely? Attached to the to the books.
Well, that's quite interesting, Neil. I mean, I might chip because I've got a slightly different, because my PhD supervisor, because I've just finished my thesis in old age. He's what's called a TSSI Marxist, a temporal single system interpretation in Marxist. Now, what's interesting? What's interesting about my supervisor, I'm a huge fan of. He's a great academic. He's kind of into MMT. Yeah, and part of the reason is because, you know, we've got an orthodoxy, if you like, within heterodoxy. So, in a sense, MMT is a bit of a fringe group to an extent within orthodoxy. Like, so, for example, post-Keynesian, you might argue, is an orthodoxy in heterodoxy. And we're a bit on the fringe. Some PKs kind of like us, and others like Pally and co really don't. And because he's a TSSI Marxist, a lot of the, if you like, mainstream Marxists don't accept what he's saying. Now, I'm biased, and he's a clever guy. He's actually buys into MMT quite interestingly, and I think there is compatibility with TSSI Marx and MMT. And I found a good working relationship. He very generous and calls me his research partner. Now, if anyone is interested in how you can do it in a paper, Nick, who is, as I say, a TSSI Marx, is very fine academic. He and I have written a paper on Gims, but to an extent, he's a rebel within the Marxist school.
That's the thing.
And that gives him, his life has been tough because he doesn't follow, but he sticks in he believes Marxist theory to be internally consistent, so he doesn't have any truck with the Sraffians. No offence to the Sraffians out there. If indeed you've ever heard of the Sraffians, some of you might think that it's some sort of villain in Doctor Who. But there's a lot of controversy. Now, I'm going to trawl through the questions, see what we are.
I'm having to give quick answers here.
It's fine. One of them is this idea of endogenous money. Now, some people talk about MMT doesn't talk enough about, the sort of private money. So, I mean, I don't agree with that myself. Absolutely not. But people have criticised them, particularly post-Keynesians. Too much stress on the state. They don't mention banks. How would you answer that criticism other than saying you're wrong, you haven't read The Richest yet? I mean, is there anything else you would add?
There is a little bit of that. The first thing you've got to remember is the horizontal circuit, which is the private money circuit, is internally consistent and will actually operate entirely on its own without any within certain parameters, will operate entirely on its own.
Yeah.
And it is internally consistent and it does work. The whole point about MMT is that it takes things out of that circuit for its own use, and it does that by essentially imposing taxation on the horizontal circuit. So the horizontal circuit will run quite happily on its own, and then the vertical circuit, as we call it, pops things in and out to effectively move things backwards and forwards up into the government sector. I'm pleased to see, for example, Steve Keen finally putting the government sector into his horizontal model. That's been useful. When he gets around to adding the job guarantee, we might actually get somewhere. But it's only taken him 10 years, so there's hope for us all yet. So yeah, the horizontal private circuit does work, and it is internally consistent, and the MMT vertical circuit essentially just moves resources backwards and forwards from that to achieve the public purpose. And the trouble you have with the horizontal circuit is eventually people stop borrowing money from banks, and then things back off and people become unemployed, and then you end up with a vertical circuit which offsets that. And that's why we need a job guarantee into those things, because that ties the inductive circuit into the real circuit. If you had that, you might actually have something that might be worth looking at. We're getting there. I think Steve said years ago that we're probably looking at the same elephant from a different end, and it's just a question of feeling round and whether we'll finally get to the middle.
Steve Keen, like Steve, I interviewed him in the book. Sorry, plug again. He's almost there, Steve.
Honestly,
not to be patronising. If only he could get the trade thing, I think we would. He just has a little bit of a
hang up on it. I don't quite know why that is.
I don't know. I think he's so close. Intelligent guy, and he's almost there, Steve. He would obviously think, who am I to tell Professor Keen that? But I just wish that he just, I
don't know. I told him his accounting was wrong, and he accepted it. So he's a decent guy.
Oh no, I really. He was typical Aussie. Calls a spade a spade. In fact,
absolutely,
even shovel.
I like that.
I love the interview with him. Now then, here's another question for you from my mate Frank again.
All right.
He's looking at. I'm getting the feeling he likes your ideas about the tax stuff.
Right.
Now, what he's saying, is there anywhere in the world that you think does that or comes close to it? Like, is there any chance to
tax systems have become ridiculously complicated the world over?
Right.
Try and hide this game, and they need major simplification. I've not seen anything that's in any of the tax systems I'm familiar with, and obviously I'm most familiar with the UK ones and a little bit in Ireland. But none of the tax systems I've seen they're all there's too many ifs, buts, and ands in all of them, and they all need stripping back. From what I would consider to be the progressive point of view is you really want tax to be hidden, because that makes it easier to change the rates, and you want it to go away. You don't want it to be visible. You want it to be something that's essentially handled at the side. Now, bear in mind when the tax that I'm talking about sits alongside having a job guarantee. Important. You've got a job guarantee there, because the mechanism that you're using there, which is effectively an employment tax mechanism and a property tax mechanism, ejects people onto the job guarantee, which of course is how the job guarantee works. Is that when things overinflate, you want to push people out of the mainstream private sector onto the job guarantee to deflate things and get things back under control, so you don't lose price stability. And the tax system has to sit hand in glove with a job guarantee. If you try and do that without a job guarantee, you're going to be throwing people out onto the dole, and you don't want that.
Right, now, thank you, Neil. Now, what were the two papers that you just want to, you put two papers, I think, on the GIM site.
Yes.
There's one on negative interest rates, and what's the other one on?
One on quantitative easing.
Yeah. So basically, for the viewers, listeners out there, have a look at the work that Neil's done in collaboration with Prue, Sarah, and Claire. The great papers.
It's not that.
We all did it. Even I made a tiny contribution, spotted an odd apostrophe.
Your contributions were very valuable, Phil.
Thank you.
Very valuable.
Thank you. Now, so we're a team. The girls lead it. Neil and I just come along and do a bit of talking for them, and we're both very grateful for the fantastic work that Prue, Sarah, and Claire do. Tireless work. Okay, if you can support them, that's fantastic. Please feel free to send them messages of congratulations for getting old guys like Neil and me, who prefer just to sit in a pub and moan about the world, getting us out of that and actually getting us online, talking to people, dealing with questions. It takes a lot of patience for the girls to do that, a lot of organisation and massive respect to GIMS. I mean, Bill Mitchell called them national treasures, and I know that Neil would absolutely agree with me. We appreciate them fantastically for what they do.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got a last word for your audience before I say goodbye, Neil. Like anything you want to say at the end of your interview, you know?
Oh, yeah. And just thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been an interesting discussion, and I'm pretty certain that we haven't scratched the surface of hardly any of these things. I'm pretty certain we could have talked for about another 3 or 4 hours on this. So all I would say, Phil, is why don't we do it again sometime?
Yeah, that'll be great. I hope to do that.
As long as our audience can supply us with the questions that they want answering.
Yeah, well, that would be brilliant. I'd love to ask you more questions, Neil. It's been an absolute joy for me to ask you those questions. I'm very sorry I nicked a couple of your prime jokes. I'll try and sorry, I will try and wear a better shirt next time so we have that sort of, we don't look so we got the same tailor. Mr. Sainsbury, or wherever we got them from. Well, in my case, wherever my wife bought this from, I don't know. So I will say goodbye to everyone. Thanks to Neil. Thanks to Sarah and to Prue and for Claire. I don't know if any of the girls want to come in at that point or whether I should just...
Thank you, everybody, and thanks to Neil and Phil. It was really great for you to come. And yes, there were some extra questions, so I could maybe email them to you and you can get answers that way.
We'll get the questions together. We'll do round 2 at some point.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
The return of the interview.
Yeah. Well, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
That was the MMT podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Don't forget, you can support the show through Patreon, starting at $1 a month and get access to patron-only episodes. You can do that by going to patreon.com/MMT podcast. You can also find me on Twitter at MMT podcast, and you can find Patricia on Twitter at Patricia N. Pino, and you can email us at mmtpodcast@outlook.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope to hear from you.